Okay, so we're live now. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Jason Rogers de Cruz. I'm a shareholder with Siegfried Rivera. Before we formally introduce ourselves, we have a few points to make. First being that our thoughts go out to Champlain Towers, the victims, their family members, and of course, all those that are connected to Champlain Towers. Two, this seminar presentation is not a commentary on Champlain. We will not be answering questions related to Champlain. This is an educational seminar for the purpose of discussing the 50-year recertification, structural repairs, and maintenance. We have received a lot of calls from the media, a lot of calls from the clients, and we all thought it was appropriate to, excuse me, set up a presentation in order to give you all, the public, the opportunity to understand what this is about, what 50-year recertifications are about. We intend on keeping this presentation limited to 1 hour. And please reserve all your questions to the end of the presentation. We'll be doing our best to answer your questions. Of course, it's going to be difficult. We've already received some questions. We've already gone through them. We'll do our best with that. So let's get started with formal introductions. I'll go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Jason Rogers de Cruz. I'm a shareholder with Siegfried Rivera. I am the chair of the Construction Defect Trial Practice Group at Siegfried Rivera. I'm the construction and trial attorney. I represent condominium associations. I litigate construction and complex construction defect litigation on behalf of associations. I focus in on structural, building envelope, life safety issues, waterproofing, pool decks, anything pertaining to the construction, the original construction of a lot of these high-rise towers that we see in South Florida. I'm also involved in 50-year recertification violations. So I deal a lot with the building department with those violations. I also draft construction contracts. I negotiate and draft major structural restoration contracts for a lot of our projects here in South Florida. And of course, repairs related to 50-year recertification. I'll turn it over to John to introduce himself.
Yes, good afternoon. John Pistorino. I'm the one who did write the 40-year recertification program back in 1974. Our firm, Pistorino and Allen, we do design high-rise buildings, engineers of record for them. We involved in the construction of them as they come out of the ground. We're consultants for various building codes since 1974 as it applies to high-rise condominiums. And of course, we're involved in the construction and the concrete repair of 4 buildings that are undergoing that. And we, of course, provide construction administration for those particular projects. We're also involved in airports and bridges and that type of thing. So I guess I'll pass it on to Will.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Will Delgado. I'm the president of Castle Group, a large property management firm here in the state of Florida. In addition to leading the team here, I have in my prior life been experienced in the design, construction, and project management of high-rise buildings, specifically here in the South Florida market.
Thank you, Will. So let me just give you all a snapshot of today's presentation. I want to add, though, that we could literally spend a good 10 hours in giving this presentation. And we certainly don't have enough time for that. So this is a snapshot. This is the overview. The first thing that we're going to talk about, and primarily what John is going to talk about, is the 50-year recertification under Miami-Dade and Broward County codes. The purpose, the requirements, and the violations. Of course, I'll add a little bit on violations. The second part of the presentation today is going to be based on Chapter 718 Florida Statutes, which is the Condominium Act, and a few statutory sections that I think are important to highlight. Third point will be structural repairs, the general process, 40, 50-year recertification repairs, and then, of course, routine structural repairs and maintenance. And then finally, association challenges. Will be addressing a lot of those association challenges in dealing with funding, of course, board member concerns, unit owner concerns. So why don't we get started with the 40, 50-year recertification, and I'll turn it over to John.
Yes, so in 1974, we had a building collapse here in downtown Miami. A number of people were killed. Our evaluation of that building was that it involved a deterioration of concrete because salt had gotten into the steel and spoiled the concrete. And of course, the concrete then lost its capacity to hold. It was not really properly maintained over the period of time. So therefore, buildings of that nature, we looked around and decided that any buildings that were that vintage, we would require 40-year buildings, 40 years to be recertified. And that's what started in 1975 when we put the ordinance in. After Hurricane Andrew in 1993, we became alarmed at some of the issues we saw with exposed buildings and electrical systems. So electrical inspections were added in 1993 after Hurricane Andrew. So of course, it's a Miami-Dade ordinance regarding existing buildings. Then Broward County also adopted the same programs. So then on the next slide, I'll show this pictures it took of the building collapse in 1974. Next picture also shows the same item. But the best thing is that to justify or people about the 40-year recertification, sometimes we show these pictures about what happened and why the 40-year recertification is necessary. As the next slide is just another, well, it wasn't a picture that shows that. So the purpose of determining it, the scope of it is having to do with the general structural condition. Engineers who are have the ability of understanding of how buildings are designed and how they're constructed, then can go ahead and do the inspections in a reasonably safe manner, assuming the buildings have been taken care of. So the 40 years, once again, was established because of the issuance of buildings that were around that period of time. And the idea was that any new buildings that were built after 1975, that the building owners would still properly maintain the buildings as required. And the 40-year recertification was to give the building official a chance to have something on record that it had been complied with all that time. As the next slide will show you. So when you go to the next slide, which is the how the report is written. So you have to have, once again, a person who is licensed in the state of Florida, structural engineer or architect who is also licensed, who understands buildings. It does include electrical too. And so therefore, what happens is the building official does receive a report signed and sealed by the architect or engineer stating that the building is in condition is intended to be in. So the next slide then will show what happens if a building is found to be okay and not requiring any work, then a certificate, the architect will, an engineer will provide that signed and sealed statement. If work is required, then the building official can give time to redo additional repair work, as long as there is nothing impending that would be a problematic and there's no potential for personal injury or collapse or anything of that nature. The building official will be advised in the process of doing that kind of repairs necessary. We know that the condominium associations or owners may be going out for bid. It's going to take some time. If necessary, a temporary shoring would be put in place or whatever is necessary to make sure the building is still safe for occupancy. So the next slide, please, would be then showing what, this is official statement by BORA, which is the Dade County Board of Rules and Appeals, that oversaw the South Florida Building Code. And this is their publication that shows the extent that it is a visual examination. When you go to the next slide, also you'll see in there that included in the concept that it's the inspection is also to realize the effects of time with degradation of the materials that the building was originally built with, and to see that if any issues have to do with weathering or something that would degrade the materials, that would be taken into account. So then we go to the next slide, and then if we, this is the slide that is where the building official will give a notice to the owners of the building that your 40-year recertification is coming up and you need to comply with it. Now, once again, we emphasize we don't want to wait for 40 years before we start doing our building repairs. What we want to do is look after the building from the day that the building is actually built, when it's first occupied, and you keep up with the maintenance of the building as it's intended to be the time it was built, so that when you do get a notice like this, it should be fairly easy for a structural engineer to go through a building and see that the building has been maintained or repaired, so that a notice like this then is something that can be easily handled. So the next slide then shows.
And I have a comment on this one too, John. So
All right.
this is just a model notice that a client would receive, and it's really important that as soon as this notice is received by the association, that it pay extreme attention to this notice. You want to be prepared, like John said, well in advance of this notice, but be cognizant that this notice is forthcoming. Also keep in mind that notices get lost in the mail all the time, so that's a problem. So, you know, there are situations where notices have been sent out, the client hasn't received the notice, and all of a sudden they're behind. This is what happens when you don't comply with the notice. The Miami-Dade County will send out a 40-year-old building recertification notice of referral to the unsafe unit. So John, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, well, if they haven't complied with the recertification program, then they sent out this notice. Now, the building official can issue a violation then, and the violation gives the building official, if it's not complied with a period of time, then the building official does have the authority to withdraw the certificate of occupancy from the building and actually ask the building to be vacated if there is an impending life safety issue. But at this particular point in time, then the building official is engaged, and the association or the building owners then should actively be involved in advising as to how long it's going to take to do the work if they are found to be in non-compliance. So then the next slide really has to do with what we do when we're doing a evaluation. And we're concentrating strictly on structural on this presentation, not getting into electrical. But what I do is we get all the previous history of the building in order to do a proper evaluation of its condition, make sure we have all the previous repair permits, certainly the structural drawings that may be available, any of the violations, if you've had building has been subject to hurricane claims and that sort of a thing. Then what happens with the, when you get all that information together, then you do a visual examination. Now, a competent structural engineer, aside from looking for cracks, obvious open cracks, which means that the steel has corroded is cracking the concrete. Steel will expand when it starts to rust. And that's the problem of then when it rust expands and it breaks the concrete. But if you have, say, a movement of the structure, maybe from some kind of settlement, something like that, then the concrete will definitely show a different kind of a crack pattern from the what we call moment cracks or other kinds of cracks that show the fact that the building has moved somewhat. It'll show that structural signs of distress, and that has related to foundation settlement as well. The cracks are known as shear cracks. So we don't really have a requirement to test anything in terms of building's been up and shows that it can hold the loads. But if we're concerned about the condition of the concrete, and then we can say, okay, well, we're going to go from visual. We're going to require a test of the concrete strength to make sure that something hasn't happened there on the concrete that has affected its strength. If we become more concerned, we can even do what we call geotech ground borings, where we are actually evaluating condition of the ground. And then there's other ways of testing, which is a GPR, ground penetration radar. But normally what we're doing is we look for the concrete is solid, and you can observe it by tapping it to see if it gives you a sharp ting. But if it gives you a hollow sound, that may be something that shows you that something is going on behind the concrete, where you must do further evaluation. So the main structure is the columns that hold up the building, and the slabs that floor slabs. There are something called capital columns over the columns that are part of the slab that is just a thickness of the slab that comes down. Some buildings have beams and girders on there. Floors and balconies are more, the balconies themselves we found to be more problematic because they're exposed to the weather and salt water. And so we do have to look at all the balcony slabs and that sort of thing. Up in the roof framing, also with the heavy equipment up there, maybe cooling towers and that type of thing, we also have to look at. So in terms of the structural distress, once again, the cracks in the structural members, spall concrete, once again, is where the steel has become rusted. And this, we know that sometimes buildings are built the concrete without enough cover on the concrete. The concrete actually does protect the steel as long as it has in our area of a high-rise buildings, it's got 1.5 inches of cover. But sometimes the reinforcing steel gets too close to the surface, and we know that water and water vapor can enter the concrete, and so therefore with salt in it, and that's what affects the it starts the corrosion of the steel, and then the cracking of the concrete. So the next slide then would show that, yeah, on the roof, we do have issues with the roof to make sure that it is, most roofs are designed for a whole 6 inches of water. That's 30 pounds roof uplift loads, but we're worried about the water ponding on the roof because that can damage the structural slab. We want to make sure the water gets off the roof. We have emergency overflow scuppers to make sure that they're operating. And of course, all the equipment on the roof should be anchored down. And there's a lot of issues having to do with that. The roofs do have to slope to roof drains that takes the water off the roofs. And so that's an important part of the inspection. So you go to the next slide then. And these buildings are designed to be closed structures. That is, closed envelopes. If a wind gets into a structure, say from a hurricane standpoint, it can create different loads on a building because of that. So they're designed to be enclosed. So even though the windows, doors, sliding glass doors and all that aren't holding the building up, they're still considered to be part of the building wall and keeps the wind and water out so you don't have openings. So the biggest culprit with those say sliding glass doors is that you have they're properly anchored to the walls of the building. And of course, this culprit is that that sealants and gaskets and things that keeps the water out of the windows and door frame, so that it doesn't weaken the fasteners that hold the windows and doors on. So with the next slide, then, well, this is a sample of corrosion that this is looking up into a balcony slab. But let me just go on to say that from what I've covered so far, that all of this stuff is important. It can be avoided, this kind of corrosion, if the building is maintained to be waterproof or watertight. And that's done with the usual paint and also other kind of waterproofing types. So the next slide shows this is just evidence. This is corrosion within a column and that you would see. So if you're walking around a building, your buildings, and you happen to see conditions like this is where the steel for some reason has already begun to corrode, and this is what you bring up to your property manager or who's ever in charge. You start to see things like this. This is an indication. You don't wait, as I say, 40 years for a building to develop something like this. We can see this in buildings that could be 20 years old for that matter. Next slide, please. It shows additional work.
And John, I have a question for you. So looking at this picture, where is the steel located? Would it be the darkened area in the middle of that column, or?
Yeah, the column, the vertical steel that goes up and down, that's the column steel that holds the column together. The horizontal steel is like a cage that's wrapped around and keeps all the other vertical steel together, so that the concrete itself isn't concentrated. The strength of the concrete is inside that what we call a steel cage. So if you look at that vertical piece of steel to your right, and where you have the outside face of the column, that's called the concrete cover. And that's what protects the steel. Now, why this is going on here, of course, we don't know. If salt got in there and the original construction, then if you have salt inside concrete, even if you have water protection, the salt can go ahead and start attacking the steel in an early stage. Once again, this is a beam that has been it's holding up a slab. You can see the rusted steel there on your left side. You can see that some kind of patching has been done, and previous patching has been done. And of course, we want to make sure that there's a particular way, the American Concrete Institute has a particular way of attaching or repairing this condition. So all of these conditions then, an engineer would once identify them in a condition and making sure that none of it has reduced or threatens the load carrying capacity of the member. The report then would show this kind of conditions. The reports would go to the building official and the association or owners of the building. Then what it would require that contract documents be drawn up so that a contractor can come in and properly repair. And there's very good repairs provisions made so that it's done right. And once the repairs are done, they're permanent repairs. The condition will not continue. This is another example of a beam. Now this is horizontal steel. This is a beam, and the bottom, the crack in the bottom means that once again, and you can see even in this one that repairs were done, in the previous repairs were done. If you look on the, right where the left area is, the repairs have to be done in a particular manner. You actually have to expose the steel all the way around and make sure that it's still sufficient and made rust resistant. Sometimes we have to replace the steel altogether if it's corroded too much. Next slide, please. Another example of previous repairs that were insufficient. And I just have to emphasize that when repairs are done, they're expensive and they have to be done in a manner that makes them permanent. At that point, then the engineer record, and what we do here, we require these repairs to be reviewed by what we call a threshold building inspector, which is an engineer that is certified to be dealing in buildings of this type. The next slide, please. We won't bore you with slides, but here's an example of water coming through expansion joints from the roof above, and then the bottom steel, which is showing it's already corroding, and the fact that the concrete is now broken away, been removed away. The bottom steel is the load carrying part of these beams. These beams will tend to go down, and so the bottom steel gives the concrete the strength to keep the beam there. And that's one of the areas which is critical. Something like this might recall temporary shoring, and certainly temporary shoring when it's being repaired. Next slide, please. On the edges of the balconies, which are very it's subject to our salt air, the steel that comes out of the balconies in this case was corroding. The stucco was removed, and this is an instance where it's very important to make sure that your buildings are painted along the coast. We say every 5 to 6 years to keep them waterproofed. And the purpose is not, the paint is not to keep them, to make the buildings look pretty, but to not allow water to get into the steel. This is an example of that. Next slide, please. And
John, I have a question about this one here. So
yeah.
These pickets right here, those would be the balcony railings, right?
Yes.
And can you talk to the group about what happens with the railing post pockets if they're not properly constructed or maintained, and what happens in that area?
Well, the railings go into a sleeve that, and these railings are generally aluminum. They go into a sleeve that is supposed to be properly built so that aluminum and the steel don't come together, because then you have electrolysis. And so if there's a problem there, it does manifest itself in reasonably short time when the building is built, maybe even 5 years. And so the railing can become unstable, and then the water that can get in there, the pocket of the railing, can get to the steel that's embedded in the slab, as you see there.
So John and I have been involved in projects where we have seen issues with railing post pockets, corrosion in those particular areas on projects that are less than 3 years old. So, you know, it's not just in older buildings, it can be in brand new buildings as well.
Yeah, this is another balcony edge. And we have, these are post-tension cables, which is a newer, well, when we say newer system, it's more prevalent now and since the middle 80s. And these areas along the balcony edges are very susceptible to corrosion unless the building is kept waterproofed, because once corrosion starts, these cables, these post-tension cables, can lose their ability, that the cables within the building are in high tension to maybe 27,000 pounds, 17,000 pounds per cable, and there's a lot of them. They go, there may be 12, 14 inches on end, but the problem is that these cables all depend upon the anchor, which is right at the face of the balcony. If that anchor gets corroded, then the cables will lose their ability to hold, their stress will be reduced, and that's one of the main carrying loads of the building. Another reason why you have to keep the balconies waterproofed, so these cables don't have a chance of getting rusted. Here you can see this is underway, this repair is underway. You can see this picture, how shoring has been installed. Now the building has not been evacuated or anything like that, but certainly people are not able to use their balconies. The shoring that's put in has to be designed by an engineer. You can see to the right of this picture, the shoring in the other balconies, and the shoring normally goes from the very top all the way down to the bottom of the structure, so that the balconies themselves are stabilized. Of course, the unit owners still remain in their units, but there's not an issue of any type of uncontrolled collapse or something like that. Next slide, please.
John, and
Yes.
on the topic of PT cables, I think it's important for our audience to know that there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of those cables that run through the slabs. So when you see it in one particular slab, you can assume that it's going to replicate in every floor throughout the building.
Yes, I failed to mention that in these typical buildings, you may have 12,000 to 14,000 cables in the building because they're about 12 or 14 inches on center. They go through every slab in both directions, and they're anchored on the outside edge of the building, which is often the balcony slabs as well as the beams. Thank you. Okay, this is just a typical picture of how the construction is underway with using swing stages on cables that are tied from the roof. So occupants of buildings who are involved in this, the building manager and the contractor will identify where the building is being worked on and repaired, so that the unit owners will understand any kind of restrictions they have, and of course the noise. This is called a drop, so that the building people know, what stage the construction is. Next slide, please.
So before we move on to the next slide, so Will, I'm sure for a lot of your projects, when significant concrete restoration is going on, you all are sending potential letters to the unit owners, letting them know what's going on, and potentially closing off balconies so that they can't access balconies and follow balconies. Yeah,
one of the primary roles of the property management team when a community undergoes extensive work like this, one of the best things they can do for the overall community is to keep the lines of communication open. So letting residents know that a balcony, like one of the pictures we saw earlier, will not be available, primarily because of the unit owner's safety, as well as for the safety of the men who are working on these swing stages. But letting folks know that when a swing stage like what you see in this current photo will be in front of potentially a window, so someone can maintain their privacy, as well as the safety aspects. And then there's the noise factor. I always tell our clients there's no such thing as a quiet chipping hammer. So when work's going on in the course of the day, yes, it will be noisy. Sometimes people believe that noise on one side of the building will not permeate the rest, but I tell them that it will carry. The hard materials that are used for construction, they're pretty good conduits of noise and sound. So we let them know when it is. We try to regulate as best as we can the hours that the team's working to minimize the inconvenience to the residents. Right, and I think it's echoing some of your comments. I think what's important here is keeping the residents informed. I know I've been in situations representing some of my clients where unit owners are dissatisfied with the noise. Mm-hmm. They're upset that they can't utilize their balconies. And it's a matter of expressing to them, hey, these are structural issues that have to be addressed, and they have to be performed. So, we apologize that you can't use your balcony for the next 3 or 4 months, but understand that this is extremely important to get done. Yeah, and Jason, one other item along those lines, cost is always a factor. Mm-hmm. And as you look at this photo, John will tell you this all day long, that when you get into something like concrete restoration, it's not an exact science. You get an engineer who gets on a swing stage like that, they do a sounding test, they mark out what they believe to be the extent of an area that needs to be repaired. But until you start doing the destructive phase where you remove what's bad and you can finally see exactly what's going on behind that stucco, you may have, and typically you have, that the extent of the damaged area is greater than what was initially marked. It does, in fact, lead to some change orders. But the question is, do you fix it correctly, or do you just fix it for the sake of appearance here? And I'm pretty sure everyone here would say that you fix it correctly. So you have to go the full extent of the damaged area. That's right. And the board should not be beat up unfairly if a change order comes in because the initial quantity in the estimate wasn't 100% precise.
Yeah, that's very important. The engineer will have to be working with the contractor, and he will tell the contractor how far to go in exposing any kind of corrosion in the steel. So where you might have so many linear feet of steel to fix, that would be estimated, but it doesn't make sense not to go and continue the rest of it, because if you don't fix it completely, then the steel will continue to rust in the area that you've stopped your repairs on. You haven't fixed it. I don't want to use too many medical terms, but if you don't cut the cancer out, it's going to continue on. You've got to get rid of it altogether.
Yeah, and from a legal perspective, when I'm drafting contracts, clients will always ask me, Jason, I've got a concrete restoration job. I want a lump sum agreement, fixed price to do the whole thing. And I say that's impossible. So put in your allowances, put in a heavy contingency, because say, for example, you budgeted $1 million, it could be 1.5 million. We just don't know. And it's important to get the job done. Next slide, and I'll continue the presentation from this point. And I want to talk about Chapter 718, Florida Statutes, briefly touch on it. So, you know, a lot of clients want to know what their duties are, what their obligations are. And I've picked a few sections just to educate the group. One is section 718, 113, sub 1, maintenance. This is the current version. I clipped out a portion and it says maintenance of the common elements is a responsibility of the association. Very important. The association, what are we talking about with regard to common elements? We're talking about structural components, waterproofing, roof, stucco, paint, you know, all the photographs that you all looked at previously with John, those are the common elements. And it's very important that the association maintain those common elements through maintenance protocols, through structural repairs, through repairs, whatever you want to call it. You have to keep on top of it. The second section I want to address with you all, and I found this very interesting, section 718, 113.6. Now, this is a repealed version. It was only in effect between 2008 to 2010. And what's interesting about this section, and by the way, I don't know why it was repealed, but it's certainly addressed the preparation of reports for at least every 5 years. So it reads, as to any condominium building greater than 3 stories in height, right? Those are all the high rises in South Florida. At least every 5 years, the board shall have the condominium building inspected to provide a report under seal of an architect or engineer authorized to practice in the state, attesting to required maintenance, useful life, replacement cost, and common elements. So that's very important. This is no longer the case. The statute doesn't exist anymore. I'm not sure why, but I thought it was good historical information. Finally, section 718.301 4P. This is primarily for new construction, and it puts the burden on the developer to deliver what's called a turnover report to the association, and it is supposed to identify the required maintenance, useful life, and replacement cost of building components such as roof, structure, fireproofing, fire protection, elevators, heating and cooling systems, seawalls, equipment, painting, irrigation, and the like. So you have, if you're in a new condominium building, new construction, developer is obligated to produce this turnover report for evaluation. However, I will say that the trend and what should be done is that the association should hire its own independent engineer to properly evaluate this new structure for any structural issues, roofing, waterproofing, and all the rest of the building components as well. So that should be done on every new construction.
Jason, if I could just a point on that. In my time as a developer, we made this a very formal process where we turned over the drawings and all of the other items, if you mentioned them, to the new owner board. And previously, between you and John, you had both commented on the fact that defects occur, even in new construction. So if you want to have a good starting point for understanding what you've just taken on as a board in your building, the best place is these documents. So it may not seem as important at the time when you're receiving everything, but when it comes time to do some work, those drawings will be critical for the team you hire to do the repair work.
That's absolutely important. And that's a constant problem, because sometimes a new board doesn't know what to do with the documents. They have no idea. They put it in a closet somewhere. There are all these construction records that are very important to the project. You know, 8 years down the road, there's a problem with a particular component, and everybody asks, where are the plans? Where are the specifications? Where are all the documents? And don't rely on the city or the local jurisdiction to house all the documents. So there are permitted plans that you'll find within the city documents. You may find other documents such as applications for permit history, but you're not going to find project records in the city records. They don't, that's not their job. They don't house those documents. So what Will says is very important.
I would like to add there, Jason, that the 718, that was originally in the state statutes for those projects which were older projects, which were basically rental projects, rental buildings that had been converted to condominiums. And that was the purpose of it. But then the state changed that and applied it to new construction as well. So the 718 still requires an independent architect and engineer, different from the contractors or the engineers of record, to evaluate the building. And even though, Jason, you're saying that, yeah, you should have the board should have their own independent engineer, but the engineer who's doing this 718 should look at the building also critically, and unless they were part of the construction quality control going up, so they would know where the defects are. So the 718 should also show any kind of problems that need to be dealt with up front.
Yep. So the next portion of our presentation deals with structural repairs and maintenance. So we've talked about 40, 50-year recertification, and for all the attendees, that applies not only to Miami-Dade County, but also applies to Broward. So when John was speaking about the 40, 50 year, he was also referring to the Broward Code as well, as it's modeled after the Miami-Dade codes. So the way that we break down the construction phase, you have a problem, you have issues that need to be addressed. We have two different categories. One is the 40, 50 year structural repairs that you have to comply with Miami-Dade and Broward codes. And the second section would be under the association's obligations to maintain the property, meaning they have to comply with Chapter 718 and perform their repairs and maintenance. John mentioned this earlier, Will mentioned this earlier. Do not wait for the 40, 50-year recertification requirements. Don't wait for it. You have to perform routine repairs to building components such as roof, stucco, paint, concrete, steel, post-tension cables, balconies and railings, waterproofing and caulking, and the list of building components that are here on this sheet. John, can you elaborate for us on that? As to something
Yes.
you like seeing done?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. We know that the roofing is not going to last as long as the building. These buildings can last over 100 years if they are properly maintained as far as the structure is concerned. But the roofing will not. And the roofing normally will last 20 years, maybe more than that. So the association is going to have to replace the roofing, and not to when it reaches the end of its useful life. And you cannot wait till it starts to complaints come from leaks that could get into the structural slab. So the building code requirements to replace the roofing then does require that roofing be done with slopes, the re-roofing done with slopes. There are interior roof drains. So the roofing is one of the most susceptible parts. Stucco also will crack on the building on the outside. These buildings change in volume. When it heats up in the daytime, they get they enlarge, and then at nighttime they get and so it's a back and forth. They reduce and back and forth. Sometimes if you have issues with the stucco, it can crack the stucco. So it's very important that cracks in the stucco and the paint, the cracks be repaired and the paint be kept in up to date so that water doesn't get behind the stucco, which then could create bigger problems. You don't want stucco falling from the building. So the painting, keeping the building painted on a program, we say 5 or 6 years, which is the waterproofing, also protects the concrete. The concrete and steel at the cable post-tension cables, I've discussed about the vulnerability. Another thing very important that we've talked about is the balconies, the railings. They're exposed to the weather as well. The railings are, of course, very life safety issue. And so that's where the state does require that somebody look at the railings every year. Doesn't necessarily have to be an engineer. I emphasize that the waterproofing and caulking, we do have waterproofing systems, polyurethane systems that can be put on balconies that will better protect the concrete. Same applies, of course, with the windows and doors that they're maintained. And then, of course, the electrical, mechanical, and fire protection is another category that we're not really discussing in this.
Yeah, and I want to add one thing here. We will all find buildings with original design and construction issues. And we need to address those original design and construction issues. There are a lot of buildings out there that were not properly designed, not properly constructed. And it's not simply a matter of maintaining it, it's a matter of repairing those items and making them work as they're supposed to work. So there is a distinction between structural repairs and repairs to address those construction defects. And then there's the maintenance obligations as well. So you have both of those that have to be viewed. So for example, if you have a construction deficiency that needs to be corrected, correct it. That's important. Just don't keep the same construction deficiency in existence, address it, move on, maintain it.
Jason, along those lines, I just want to remind everyone here, we live in a hurricane zone, and your building may only be 10 years old, and you don't have your 40-year recertification on your mind for some time, and a hurricane has passed by, and I've had associations say that they didn't bother to have an inspection done after a direct impact from a hurricane. And John would tell you that a hurricane puts unusual stress on a building, and where something was perfectly fine before, you'll find that there may be substantial cracking and things are out of alignment right after the passing of a major storm.
Yep. Good points. So we've got 12 minutes left and we have a lot of slides to go. I'm going to kind of move through this as quickly as possible. So at this point, you have to make repairs to the building, you have to maintain the building. And so what I've seen when I get involved in projects later on is I see there's not enough critical analysis by the association and its team. I sometimes find that there are lack of qualified and experienced people for the job. And ultimately, I also see that sometimes wrong people or entities are selected for the job. And what's important here is that when you're doing these projects, have a solid construction team. You need to select qualified and quality people. Your project is only going to be as good as the people you hire. Recommendations are only as good if you follow them. And also look for experience. John mentioned that earlier. It's experience and it's qualification. So starting with the design side, because that's important. I've seen clients just hire a stucco subcontractor or hire a concrete contractor without a design professional involved. And that entity goes out, makes repairs, and those repairs aren't properly performed. So hire the right people. Design professionals are architects, they're landscape architects, they're engineers, they're structural engineers, civil engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers, and they should be licensed. Are they a licensed professional engineer in the state of Florida? Are they a certified threshold inspector? Are they a licensed registered architect? Other questions that one should ask them is, do they sign and seal drawings? Have they done it before for other projects? Have they functioned as an engineer of record, meaning that engineer responsible for the job? Have they done similar work, similar projects? Ask for the project list. John mentioned earlier about the American Concrete Institute. Ask these design professionals, what organizations are you part of? The ACI, the Post-Tensioning Institute, the Portland Cement Association. Are you a certified Florida threshold building inspector? So ask those questions. I find that there's not enough critical analysis of questions. Manufacturers, a lot of the products out at these projects are manufactured, whether it's balcony railings, whether it's waterproofing or roofing materials. What experience do these design professionals have with a particular product? If they're going to prepare plans and specifications, they need to understand the type of product that's going to be used. So what I find sometimes is that the design professionals don't really pay attention to the products being used. And that is, I think, an oversight and something that they really need to understand. If they're going to specify a particular type of waterproofing or a particular roof membrane, they need to understand how it functions, how it's supposed to operate, the warranties. Design professionals offer services. They offer design services. They often offer construction administration, owner's representative work. And what that means is that they review applications for payment. So if you have, for example, a contractor working on the project and that contractor is submitting invoices, that design professional owner's representative will look at the application, compare it to what's being performed in the field, and determine whether or not payment needs to be made. If there's defective work, payment's not made. If the work is pursuant to the contractual requirements in the code, then payment will be made. Inspections, design professionals will also get involved with inspections if you hire them to do it. And you have to ask the question, are you checking for the progress of the work or are you checking for the quality of the work? That's very important.
Jason, one comment on the topic of manufacturers.
Yes.
I think our audience should understand that the major manufacturers for the very technical products, they have field representatives which are happy to come to your job site, your project, and inspect the work, because typically they certify the vendors in the application process of that particular product. And they have their own folks come there as a matter of quality control to inspect the work. That's how they're going to then uphold your warranty, that it was in fact applied in the way they designed it.
Absolutely. So keep them involved, invite them to the project, make sure they're conducting those inspections. Consultants on projects, new construction in particular, there will be consultants that are specialized in certain areas, such as waterproofing, concrete testing. So for any of your restoration projects where you have an engineer of record that's already involved, consider bringing in a specialized consultant to help your engineer or architect of record as well. They typically will have experience with waterproofing products. They'll have relationships with the manufacturers, and they know who those people are, as Will alluded to before. They'll invite them out to the project and go through the details of the project to make sure everything is going right. Design professionals prepare bid packages and plans, and that's very important. No contractor should be bidding on a job without plans and specifications. If they're bidding on a major job, especially a concrete restoration job or a structural job, without plans and specifications, it's not going to go well. Okay, so that's what a design professional does, prepares those bid packages, sends them out to qualified vendors or contractors to bid. They'll have a bid meeting. Everybody meets on site, reviews, inspects the condition, walk the property, and there may be additional testing performed to identify the conditions on the project. Contractors, very important. Are they qualified? Have they done this work before? You know, contractors have a non-delegable duty under the law. Will they be responsible for subcontractors? You know, do they plan on using subcontractors? Who is the qualifier? Who's the one that's qualifying that job? Who is the superintendent? Who is the foreman? So it's very important. Again, I find that construction work and any work is only as good as the person overseeing the work or the person doing the work. So it's very important that you select a qualified general contractor that has a lot of experience in this area, and you want to meet the foreman or superintendent that's involved in overseeing the job on a daily basis. Another question, I alluded to this before. Will the general contractor use subcontractors, or are they going to self-perform? If they're going to use subcontractors, check the qualifications of the subcontractors, because if the subcontractor is not qualified to do the work, then what's the point of bringing in that group altogether? Another thing that's important, insurance of the project. Make sure they have enough insurance. We don't have enough time to talk about what's enough insurance. Every project is very different. And then bonding capacity. Can they achieve a performance and payment bond? Can they obtain a performance and payment bond? That's very important. And for what amount and for what time period? Again, manufacturers, we talked about this briefly, but they're very important. Will also said this. They provide technical services. They come out to the project. They're also responsible for delivering what's called a notice of acceptance, which is, John, could you tell us a little bit about an NOA and how that works?
Yeah, the notice of acceptance was actually devised in Dade County back in the 70s. And what it is a contractor or manufacturers, that is, well, if they want to use a prefabricated product in Dade County, let's say a window or a door, they have to go through a whole series of tests and prove that their windows and doors will meet the building code requirements for wind and any other elements. And then and that's an independent engineer gives that test, and the county then will say, okay, we accept it. You can use that in buildings here under the restrictions it has. Roofing is a very good example where roofing manufacturers, whether they be what we call low slope roofs, shingle roofs, any type of roofing material, built up roofs, as a roof system, they will provide and say, here's our system. It complies with the uplift wind requirements and also longevity requirements, standpoint of water resistance. And if the county thinks that the testing program, which is extensive, have been done, then they will issue an NOA. The state of Florida also issues NOAs as well from Tallahassee, but Miami-Dade County's NOAs are accepted and preferred all over the state.
Thank you, John. Legal, I'll touch on that just briefly. You want qualified engineers, you want qualified contractors, subcontractors, you want qualified lawyers that are specialized in the area that assist in protecting the association. Don't sign a contractor or subcontractor's contract. Get association counsel involved, sign the association's contract or work off the association's contract. That's very important. I find I get involved in problem projects where clients will call, not my clients, but other people's clients will call me in to evaluate construction projects and see what's wrong with the project. And sometimes I'll find that the client will just sign a proposal that the contractor puts in front of them. No protection for the association, no insurance requirements, bonding requirements. It's just a disaster. So, please pay attention to your entire team. The construction team is very important for construction projects, and it also includes property management. And I'll turn this over to Will.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I literally have dealt with this very question, hundreds of times in talking with our boards. And jokingly, I say to them, the next time you have a toothache, how about we call in the painter? Right. And it's in the context of, guys, we have to align skill sets with the problems. Right. So to the point here about your property manager is not your project manager, you're going to hire these experts, use them accordingly. The best role for your property manager, as we were talking about before, is coordinating the team. If we've got to get everyone together for a progress meeting, the communication plan with the residents and the board, and then help processing payments and things like that. But the property management team is there to hopefully make the project go smoothly by keeping everybody in line with the schedule. And when things change, keeping them aware of the changes. But out of the entire team of hundreds of managers that my company employs, I literally have one individual who has an architecture background. None others are engineers, none are former general contractors. So recognize one of the comments that's been made many times on the slides here is know what you're hiring. And so your property manager there is to do the administration of your building. The maintenance team that is part of your property management team is there to do the basic maintenance. When you get into a 40, 50-year recertification, we're talking about highly skilled individuals like John who are going to come on board to lead you through.
So association challenges, again, I'll let Will tell us about some of the challenges that his group has been confronted with over many years that are common across the board.
Yeah, and I would start off by saying, give you a quick quote here from Benjamin Franklin, that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's a theme here for how do we go about this? How do you do it where it's not going to be such a detrimental financial blow to the association? So let's talk about planning in terms of short and long term. And on the short term front, it's really about your association budget, and in particular, two areas. One, the repair and maintenance section, where frequently that's an area where the board will look to make cuts that perhaps we can pull back on this particular item. And I would tell you that is a short-term gain and a long-term strategic flaw, because not addressing these items as they present themselves, as John has previously spoken about, only leads to those problems growing in the severity when you deal with it. It is exponentially cheaper to deal with problems as they arise rather than allowing them to go for years and turn into major repairs. The second part of that is people. And again, we've spoken about you're as good as what you hire. I recently had a board president ask me for a maintenance chief who had an electrician's license. He was certified in HVAC and even wanted him to be a certified pool operator. And he asked for it at a ridiculously low rate. That I would have greater success in delivering you a true live unicorn than delivering what he was asking for in the current market. So if you want someone with those kinds of skills, then I would tell you that you're going to have to pay accordingly. And it's not a matter of I'm trying to artificially inflate your budget. It is a matter of what are your needs. Long-term planning. Every association has to adequately fund their reserves. It is, in my mind, the key strategic point of being able to take care of your building in the long term. If you look at your reserve schedule, it is indeed a plan. You have the list of components that need to be replaced. You have the approximate value of those items, and then you have an estimate of when they'll need to be replaced. So pay attention to that, because I've also seen that sometimes when people have a reserve study done, their useful life, which is the extent of how long this item is going to last you, isn't based in reality. HVAC units tend not to last 30 years in Florida. We use it too often. It doesn't get a break like it does up north. We have severe weather, and I'm talking about both hurricanes and the day-to-day just severe sun, which is taking its toll, as well as the effects of salt from being this close to the ocean. So pay attention to those items, fund them accordingly, and then in the long term, plan these items. It's not really a surprise that your 40-year recertification is coming up. You know the date, and you can look at these items in advance. And I would also tell you that for the items that come up prior to that, let's say you're going to do a roof replacement, I would be looking a year out on how I'm going to do that, and engaging with professionals like we were talking about earlier, starting off with hiring someone to do a moisture survey in your roof. But at the time you're ready to execute, if you follow this guidance, you'll have the money in hand, you'll have the appropriate experts on board, which will lead to hiring the appropriate roofing contractor and getting the job done with the least amount of inconvenience to your residents. Special assessments. So when people do not follow this kind of guidance, frequently here comes a need for a special assessment. It's a difficult position to be in. People are, I'm talking about owners, are paying for all the normal things they do, and now they're going to get hit with a large bill. So the best way to prevent that is to have adequately funded reserves. But if you do get into that world, then look at your management company. We do have the ability to maintain relationships with banks where we can work with you on the financing, which could help ease the financial burden to the residents. And last piece here, folks, talking about board members and unit owner involvement. Frequently, particularly if there's special assessments involved, it can lead to a lot of conflict with the ownership and the board. So I would say to offset that, we hear this comment about transparency and everything. In your board meetings, share the information you have. I find that even the most reluctant unit owner can be persuaded when they see the evidence for themselves. When they see pictures from reports like what John had up before, and you can see the concrete's falling, you can see that the rebar is gone or a post-tension cable is about to snap. It's very convincing. It's very persuading. So share that information. I've seen some boards where they tend to hold on to it because they're worried about what the perception will be with the ownership and perhaps outside of their building. But I would tell you that the board is charged with doing the right thing, and sharing that information makes their job a lot easier. And then lastly, with unit owners, it's rare that any member of the board has the skill set of an engineer, an architect, et cetera. I ask people that all the time on our boards. And only on a handful of occasions have I had someone raise their hand and say, I am, like John, I'm a licensed professional engineer. So if you do have someone like that in their building, convince them to be involved. They obviously have the same interest that you would in preserving your building. And that if they have that particular expertise, they're a great second opinion that's available to you immediately. Jason, takeaways?
Yep. So this is the final slide of our presentation, and then we'll take questions. But takeaways, number one, hire qualified and experienced people and entities for your entire construction team. That's very important. Qualified and experienced, okay? Just because somebody is a lawyer or a professional engineer or a manager and is appropriately licensed doesn't mean they're experienced and right for your job nor qualified. So that's important. Inspections, repairs, and budgets. Conduct regular inspections to assess the condition of the building. Do not wait for the 40-year inspection to assess and repair. And by the way, our presentation was limited with regard to the 40-year, 50-year recertification to Miami-Dade and Broward County. We're not aware of such requirements in the Palm Beach counties. Also pay attention to short and long-term maintenance, repair budgets, and finally, be diligent. Ask the critical and hard questions. If you see something, say something to somebody, and then follow qualified recommendations. Now, if you get an opinion or report that doesn't seem to make sense, it's okay to get a peer review. It's okay to hire another professional engineer or another design professional to evaluate that report and come out and review the building. You're not married to just one engineering group. You can hire as many as you want. So keep that in mind. Peer review is important. Second opinions are important. In the medical field, we all go out, see a doctor, we see another doctor to get a second opinion. Why not for your building? So thank you for joining us here today. We intend on providing additional or presenting additional seminars down the road on very similar topics, but taking them into bite-sized chunks to deal more with the specifics. Here's our contact information if you want to reach out to us with any additional questions or if you just want to talk. Stephanie, I believe there are questions that have been asked.
Yes.
Those.
For everyone who's in attendance now, if you're not interested in listening to the questions, feel free to log off. As I mentioned in the chat room, we will be providing all participants a link of this recording, so you will have access to watch this again at a later time. For those that did ask questions, we're going to try to get to as many questions as time allows. So bear with us. So the first question is, what precautions should we take along the way to minimize the cost of the 40-year evaluation? When should we start preparing for it?
That's an easy question to answer. That as soon as you occupy the building, you put in motion your surveillance of the building and your constant review of the building. And it should always be continuous all the way up. So when you do get to your 40-year evaluation, there shouldn't be a lot that you have to do at that point in time if you've taken care of the building and you've maintained the waterproofing on the building and protection.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree 100% with John. Start as soon as you occupy the building. The more you maintain, the better off you'll be in the long run. And when I was a developer, our single greatest worry was water intrusion. Jason had mentioned before about specialized consultants. We use a particular company that would double check the work of our contractor and the subcontractors by testing every bit of work they did to ensure we were getting what we asked for, because our assumption was our engineers had well designed the building. And now is a matter of, did it get built that way? So start from the very beginning.
Thanks, Will. The next question is, why is Palm Beach County excluded from the 40-50-year recertification?
John, do you know the answer to that question?
Well, I mean, we have this for Dade and Broward. All of the other counties in the state are welcome to adopt it. I know that some building officials in Palm Beach County may have incorporated it from time to time, but there's nothing right now that Palm Beach County is perfectly allowed to, or if you will, to adopt they have not been excluded. It's something they need to adopt, and they can adopt what's been already created as a starting point for what we have in Dade County.
I would say, speak to your local politicians. We're not sure why. Stephanie, next question.
Thanks. Who tracks compliance? How do buildings get notified that they have to undergo this recertification process? And another question I've received that's kind of goes with this one is, if they miss that notice, is there some sort of website that they could track to see if they're up for recertification?
I can begin to answer that question. So typically, you'll receive a notice of the 40-50-year recertification. That's typically how it works. But my recommendation, I believe will be John's recommendation as well, and Will's, is, you should know when your building was constructed, and you should know 40 years from that point. So don't wait, but typically my clients will receive the notice, letting them know that it's coming up. Some of my clients are, thankfully well prepared for that in advance and are ready to go. But that's typically how it's done. If you miss the notification, a violation letter will be sent out. And it gets serious from that point forward, very serious.
Yeah, the various cities, building departments will already have a list of those buildings that are coming up for the 40-year recertification, and they will send the notice out. Dade County, of course, those in Dade County, but the various municipalities already have that list, and they're the ones that send it out.
And Will, from a management standpoint, can you kind of talk about, once one of your managers receives a notice like that, they bring it up to the board, what's your process like?
Yeah, absolutely. So that would be presented as early on in what we call our weekly update, which is delivered every Friday to our board, because it's an unusual item, right? It's not something you have happen all the time. So yes, that would be first notice. But again, back to Jason's point here, it's like your wedding anniversary, folks. It comes around and when it's coming up. So it should not be a surprise. The fact that you received the official notice is just confirmation of what you should already know. But then, yes, if you have been working on the planning piece, as I was talking about, you've likely then already engaged with your team. You've got your engineer on board. You've got your general contractor ready to go, because the law doesn't require you to wait till 40 years. It says you can do a lot of this work beforehand. So if you are then about to kick off the major work, again, it's not a surprise. And it's a very easy conversation then to have with the city officials about what your plan as an association is.
Thanks, Will. How do the requirements apply to garden style buildings, such as like a 2-story building?
Well, that was never the intent from my standpoint. Some of the enforcement may have incorporated those, but I'm not sure I'm not really concerned about those particular style buildings. But an association that owns the building may be required if they are responsible for those buildings.
Thanks,
Yeah, it
John.
doesn't matter. I mean, look, it doesn't matter what building you have, whether 40 or 50-year recertification applies to that or not. As Will said, prepare in advance, maintain it, keep track of your building, perform the repairs. That's what's important.
Thanks. Are inspections done at the request of the city or of the board?
If that question is referring to 40 or 50-year recertification, John, how is that addressed?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the inspections are supposed to be ongoing, as we said before. But if you get a notice, then the city is requiring that you simply go ahead and provide the certification. So at that point, the association, if they haven't done so, will have to retain the engineer architect and authorize them to do the inspections. And then whatever the report is, then the report then is sent to the building department, either a certification or gives them on notice as to the repairs that are necessary. They have to be obviously authorized by the board so that they will have a contract with the architect engineer to start the inspections. The building department is not the ones that picks the architects and engineers to do the work.
Right. So it's the board that picks the engineer or architect, excuse me, to conduct the inspection. It's very important that the association not skimp on this. This is a very important report. So one should look at qualifications and experience and make sure you get the qualified person to conduct those inspections. I know that I've heard that there are clients out there that are simply looking at cost and nothing more. And if they have a PE behind their name, that's good enough. Well, that's not good enough. I mean, you have to hire qualified and experienced people.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what is the checklist of items to be inspected for the 40-year inspection certification for a building? So what is the checklist for that process?
Well, the Dade County Board of Rules and Appeals has the 40-year recertification checklist that's also for structural and electrical. Now, this is a minimum checklist. So the person who is doing the professional who's doing the 40-year will certainly have to abide by that as a minimum. And then because buildings, of course, are very different, they may wish to expand upon that depending upon the needs of the building. But certainly the building official, the building department will make sure that that checklist that is issued is complied with.
Thanks, John. We're going to cover two more questions and then, we're reaching the end of our time here. I think this question is for John. How often should there be a structural report for a building?
Well, I was just saying, we keep saying here, ongoing is as much as necessary, depending upon how the building is performing. I mean, if you have a building that is not performing well, then the report should be at least taken looked at annually, if not even sooner. Some buildings that are performing well, maybe it's every 5 years. I don't think there's a proper answer for any one particular building. Obviously, buildings that are on the coastal areas, more subject to salt air and water intrusion and that sort of thing, require more frequent inspections.
Thank you. And then the next question is for all three of you, if you all three could chime in. What are best practices for condos to proactively optimize confidence in the structural integrity of their buildings? I would say more, what are best practices for condos in general, just to make sure that they're maintaining the structure properly?
Will, do you want to start?
Sure. One, funding. We talked about the annual budget and your reserve funding. Folks, everything here that we've discussed today has a cost associated with it, and you need to be prepared to pay that cost. Two, routine maintenance should be exactly that, routine. The more you go into a deferred maintenance status, and if you adopt a mentality of it can wait, we'll do that next year and next year. I've seen communities where that was the mantra for decades. And then at year 30, they wind up having multi-million-dollar repair work that needed to be done. So make the routine routine, because a stucco crack today, which is a very easy repair, will eventually turn into large spalling somewhere else. And that's going to obviously be more expensive. And last point on my end is, again, about the people you hire. John had some pictures up before. There was one of them where there was a previous concrete repair. Now you can tell it was done incorrectly because someone made the decision that if I simply recover that exposed rebar, that I've solved the problem. And you can tell that they don't have the proper experience to recognize that that problem was created by water. Water that came into that bit of concrete and steel from above, and no one solved the water problem. They just did the cosmetic repair of what you could see without an understanding of what was the root cause of the problem. So hire the right people. Jason?
Yeah, so I echo Will's comments. He touched on everything that I would have said. I just think that in my experience, what I've dealt with, I see that clients don't involve quality and qualified people at the very beginning. And you have to do that. Boards or volunteers, they really don't know what's going on. It's a thankless job. They rely on their experts. So involve qualified people at the beginning. Put your construction team together, your design professionals, your managers, your lawyers, and make sure you have the proper team in place to advise you in performing these tasks. Don't be afraid of a second opinion. Don't be afraid of hiring another design professional to evaluate the structure again. Don't be afraid of that. That's important. It's done quite often. Peer review is done quite often. John?
Yeah, my response is also my experience. I mean, the people live in the building, they're there every day. They see everything going on within their own area. So if you have a communication between unit owners to the building management that eventually might lead to something, just emphasize to your building owners to always be able to talk to and advise on anything that they see what might be problematic. As I say, they live there and they're their eyes on their own building.
Great, thank you. Well, we want to thank everyone again for coming on behalf of the panelists and myself. Thank you for taking the time. We will again be circulating this link as soon as the video is processed and uploaded. The contact information for all three panelists is up. If you guys have any additional questions, you could always email me. My name is Stephanie Bowman, and you can email me at sbowman@siegfriedrivera.com.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Be safe.
Thank you, everyone.